Ooh, isn't that cool? Hi, this is Curt Robbins from Higher Learning LV in Las Vegas, and welcome to Curt's Cannabis Corner. This week, I have the pleasure to talk to Mr. David Paleschuck from Seattle, Washington. He's a New York native, and he's written a book called Branding Bud. As is our tradition, let's start with Mr. Rheins. What the heck do you think about this Branding Bud book?
It's more than a book about branding. The subtitle, I think, is a little more telling. The commercialization, I'll even hold up a copy of cannabis. David starts off by pointing out that, hey, cannabis has been legal much longer than it's been illegal.
David Paleschuck, why did you write this book that so many people are responding very positively to?
I mean, for me to get my head around what the industry was, and maybe industry isn't even the right word, but what the community was, how it turned into, or how it is turning into an industry. As I left Microsoft in 2011, when the laws changed in Washington State for adult use and recreational cannabis, and having also been working at Dope Magazine, you know, I saw the community evolving. I saw brands developing. I saw events taking place.
Is it fair to say that you saw it happening right in front of you and you decided to document and package as a book that's of value to industry professionals?
That's the best way to say. When I was at Dope, I was writing a 3-page article on branding, cannabis brands. It's also an understanding of how we got here and, you know, push aside the stereotypes that were created from so many other things.
Alana Armstrong in Toronto, you work with real clients on the daily. What is the role of brand in the guidance that you give to these clients?
Most of the brands that we work with come to us with pretty much a fully realized sense of brand, right? And our job is to take that and flesh it out and, you know, kind of work on their stories, help publications understand the brand's connection to their story. So there's a little bit of kind of designing around their brand. Every little detail, even kind of having to know what sorts of compliance hurdles they've had to go through. Having a company that has a fully realized brand helps a lot.
Especially as David Rheins was saying with the history. So you start to understand where culture meets legal industry that for, you know, more than 80 years was underground culture and underground commerce, lots of billions of dollars traded hands annually.
I think David makes a really good point in the book that the illegality of cannabis was a result of commercialization. That is, the emerging petrochemical industry and lumber industry and other vested capital interests were aligned against hemp and cannabis.
Right. David Paleschuck, do you think it was like robber barons using influence to simply monopolize?
In a word, yes. I'm not one who's big on conspiracy theories, but basically Harry Anslinger was the head of what is now, you know, would be called the DEA. He was married to a Hearst family member, which was tied to basically newspapers. Newspapers were tied to the lumber families, like the Weyerhaeuser family. So the Weyerhaeuser family and the Hearst family were working together to chop down trees, create paper pulp, and push out newspapers. That clearly competed with hemp, not only versus paper pulp and newspapers, but as Dave Rheins mentioned earlier, it also touched very strongly into the petrochemical industry.
So it's big pharma, and big pharma is, you know, petrochemical synthetic drugs versus organic hemp, right? It really is a cultural schism.
Here, with regards to our marketing, of course, we're always, you know, shut down, you know, on any kind of social media. We have to watch what we do with our logo. Companies that work with us are limited. Even edibles can't be produced in certain shapes. And I think even that is impactful.
Lots of companies here getting their Instagram taken down. Sometimes for, you know, crossing over somewhat arbitrary lines, you would think. So, you know, and yeah, edibles in certain shapes, absolutely. Nothing that appeals to children.
Even your celebrities, Drake just lost his gig, or walked out on his gig with a Canopy Growth. That was one of the few sort of workarounds was, okay, attach a celebrity, although they still have Martha Stewart, name to the brand, and that will create a certain amount of buzz. So buzz marketing, what's your take on that, Alana?
The government definitely put its foot down on any celebrity endorsements, but you do have, some influences. Seth Rogen is tied to one brand, like you said. Martha Stewart as well just came on, and I don't know, I can't remember now, some like C-suite position with Canopy.
Because the other big news this week is also branding in Canada, which is Altria, the former Philip Morris Corporation, just upped their ownership. They actually had started that process back in 2018 and have now made a couple of subsequent investments. They're now 45% ownership of Kronos Group, one of the largest Canadian cannabis players, with warrants to go to 55% ownership. So all the old talk that we had going back to the 70s, that Marlboro owned the brand marks for Panama Red and all those things, and that we were going to see Marlboro Green, may come to fruition. What's the panel's take on that?
Federal legalization is coming in the United States. I think we can all see that at this point. And with that, whether we like it or not, comes roll up, comes acquisition. And what you're speaking to there, David, with Altria coming in, taking up more stake in Kronos in Canada, working to get majority stake, it's very clear that these large corporations from big tobacco, big pharma, big CPG, they want to be
big
in
alcohol.
cannabis.
Big alcohol,
you got it. And so they want to be in cannabis. So from a branding perspective, if we look around the room right now, we just have to accept that as fate. And the best thing that we can do is position these brands for acquisition. It's going to happen. And so let's put these brands in a place where when they are acquired, they have the right values, they're pushing out the right type of product and information. Obviously, there's a ton of challenges that come with that, but I think we need to recognize the inevitable and start preparing for it.
Colleen, you responded to that. What is your opinion of prepare thyself for acquisition?
I completely agree with the statement. It's just hard to swallow. It's hard because we're coming from a place where, right, we were all working in the underground. We've all, produced our own companies or started our own grows or whatever it is that we're doing that we've nurtured, for my company, my small business, and the way that it is like would be best to sell. And I do want to pivot, so I'm pointed that direction, but it hurts. It hurts to know that part of this growth stage is going to be that letting go of what we've created and what we've always done without the big guy. That's what it is, coming from somebody who is, small time,
Yeah, and in Maine, right? So it's David, speak to that. You put those big brands, the cover of your book, that's cannabis versions of McDonald's and Pepsi and Starbucks. What's your thinking? How does branding map to big business taking over a grassroots industry?
Well, it's happening, right? Whether we like it or not. Here's the thing that was interesting. I mean, when I started writing the book and came up with the concept for the cover, it really started off with, McDonald's French fry container with buds, sort of popping out of it. And then as the concepts really developed into, wow, I'm talking about all different types of form factors here. It's not just flower. It's, there are national brands in the game. There are global companies in the game. I have a love for the plant, number one, first and foremost. I also have a 25 plus year business career working for large companies. And I understand how they work. I understand that they work in their self-interest. I understand that when there's an opportunity, they'll take it. When someone starts to talk about flower and the ability to keep it at a craft level and to, respect cultivators and so on and so forth. But then someone else comes in and brings in the big corporate side of the conversation and how that will be lost over time. And I actually think it's going to be both. I actually think it will be industry, which is the flower side of things, and then ingredient, which is when it moves from flour into oils and into distillates and isolates, when it gets put into other form factors where now it's in a beverage. It's like Intel Inside. You're less focused on the brains, you're more focused on the flavor and the branding and the sexy components of it. But at the end of the day, I think there's room for both. So it will be industry and it will be ingredient. And that will sort of bifurcate the conversation and let those that love the plant, and those that are in it for whatever they are in it for will continue in that direction. But I think they'll both exist.
Interesting. So you think there is room, Mr. Paleschuck, for independent small batch providers and players within the marketplace?
I do. Just like there's a place for craft beer or craft wine.
And I think craft beer and wine is a really good example. Unfortunately, if you look at the economics of that, you'll see that the big guys control the distribution and they control the market. We're here in Seattle, Washington, the home of the IPA, but it really is hyper local and then controlled by the distributors. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the third big news story of this past week, which is Amazon's coming out with two big pieces of news. One, they would no longer test their employees for marijuana use for employment. They sort of set the tone in terms of what is minimum wage and what are standards. So I think that's big. And then number two, it sets the stage clearly for your weed delivered by Amazon Prime in 2 hours or less.
Delivery is starting to finally open up in other states. We still don't have it here in Colorado, even though they've been working on getting it set up for what feels like years. So I think just the show of faith from larger organizations, again, it may be frightening to all of us because, you know, we're this small, tight industry. It may be frightening, but it's important to the commercialization of cannabis.
Right. And my point about distribution is that is the power. So when I talk about the Altria investment, what's interesting is, well, I mean, the cigarette guys are masters at creating brand out of, you know, weeds. So that's one thing. And the difference between, you know, cigarette brands and all the culture that comes around it is certainly expertise that they'll leverage. But even more so is the distribution. So the ability to turn on hundreds of thousands of doors overnight for a brand is super meaningful. There's some great brands, but they're hyper local or regional at best.
It is different in every state. We do deliver cannabis in the state of Maine, so that is something that we are able to do. I guess I just wanted to respond a little bit to sort of networking and knowing who the players are in your industry. I think that's one of the things that's so nice about it being so small right now. We grow our own flower for the shop that I manage, but we also bring in flower from a lot of other folks. We know those folks and we know those gardens. We've been to those gardens. It's a really nice thing, at least where I am, which is a very small, really a very small state. You know, we do know each other here.
I think those struggles might become more apparent as the market opens up and some of these larger organizations have an opportunity.
I really do too. I really do too. I think that you're right about that. I do, Wes.
We were talking a lot about craft beer. A big way that a lot of craft breweries made their name is distributors. That is such a important factor of the alcohol industry. And we're starting to see it become a factor, not so much in the cannabis space, but in the hemp space. When we talk about CBD products, you know, there's these large marketplaces online, but there's also now distributors that are doing wholesale. I think those will become more popular, and that's going to lead to a lot of this growth and scale.
Mr. Paleschuck, what do you think about this?
I applaud Amazon for not testing for cannabis. Distribution is huge. So let me say that first. I think it's quite a ways off before Amazon, you know, is delivering cannabis. A lot of the things that I read this week was really sort of this jump to, oh, it's just a minute before Amazon is in the cannabis game. And I don't agree with that. When a brand wants to move into another state, which is its current way of growing its brand and becoming a national brand, state by state, it's basically through licensing. And remember, when we talk about a brand is a promise and the ability to consistently deliver on that promise. And I believe it's going to take either some serious SOPs and lots of oversight, or the ability to basically grow in a place or a region and then ship from that. And that will take federal, you know, legalization, at least here in the US.
I think that's why there will be the small local mom and pop craft shops, and there will be the large corporations of mass cannabis growers, because in order to get that consistency in a local area, for somebody who is knowledgeable or is a connoisseur, they'll want to go get that craft product. But then once we do hit federal legalization and interstate commerce opens up, there's going to be the large companies that go put down their facilities in the Midwest, and they're grown enough to feed the entire country at that point.
So what we're really talking about is the walk up from the illicit, then grassroots, then medical, then adult use cannabis space, and how that is kind of going from cottage industry into modern retail and starting to adopt vague semblances of brand. I think that the big story is about brand first, which is the whole notion of brand is that it supersedes strain, it supersedes the label, it supersedes the content. You're buying the promise. It's, hey, I like Ben and Jerry's ice cream, and if they don't have Chunky Monkey, I'm going to buy this other flavor because I trust them. And that's the power of the brand. But the real promise will be, I'm buying oil of Olay with THC or with Delta 9 or Delta 10 or Delta 8 or some, cannabinoid terpene profile. You're going to see mainstream global brands that have already established that credibility and that equity, who then get in the market by adding a little canna spice to the flavoring.
Dave, that's exactly right. And it's industry versus ingredient. And then as I thought more on that, it's industry and ingredient. So, Crest toothpaste will add CBD into it, and it's just another ingredient, but people are still buying Crest toothpaste.
And you're starting to see it in the beer space, interestingly enough, right? So you're seeing it with hemp IPAs, finally consumption clubs. And with New York saying, anywhere that tobacco can be consumed, cannabis can be consumed, it won't be long before you see the old-fashioned New York cigar bars are also cigar and cannabis bars.
There will be these, private clubs. They'll create revenue from the brands that are basically coming in the back door.
In the book, you create 14 archetypes of brands which map to those market segments. Why don't you rattle down those? That's super interesting.
Stuff.
Brand archetypes, they're shortcuts. They're simply the shortest way to connect to somebody. And that could be color, that could be font, that could be style, that could be anything. They often overlay on each other, meaning they're not mutually exclusive. So I start off with a cultivator brand. And an example of that might be like a Sherbinsky, a gender-based brand, which would be a Besito, a foodie brand, a health and wellness brand, a counterculture brand, a prohibition brand, a nostalgic brand, a charity brand, a luxury brand, a value brand, an art and design brand, a regional brand, a novelty brand, and a celebrity brand.
My Instagram name is Duchess of Indica. If you want to know what's going down in Maine, or you want to talk about, terpenes or any of your aches and pains, definitely give me a shout. I'm here for you.
Thanks, Colleen. Mr. Wesley Donahoe in Colorado.
Y'all want to learn more about the Ninth Block? Again, we do branding and PR. Check out the9thblock.com, and then definitely go buy the Branding Buds book. Wanted to say thanks again to Mr. Paleschuck for the awesome topic today.
Thank you. Likewise.
Very much so. And Alana Armstrong in Toronto, Branding Bud, David Paleschuck. What do you think about all this crazy stuff?
First of all, I need to pick up a copy of Mr. Paleschuck's book because it sounds incredible, and it sounds like it's going to give me maybe more of a base in, how branding has evolved over the years. If you would love to bust your brand out of the green leafy canna box with Alan Aldous,
nice.
Come and find us on Twitter or Instagram at Alan Aldous, or myself at Alana Armstrong on all social media.
Branding Bud is a great read. It's a lively read. It's chock full of examples of the early brands from the beginning. He spent a lot of time and energy building a primer for anyone who wants to take the business of cannabis seriously.
Well, branding is everything, right? Coca-Cola is a perfect example. If you broke it down and said, hey, there's a glass bottle filled with carbonated water and sugar and caramel color, that's not it. But have a Coke and a smile, That's it. Really, it's all about the normalization of cannabis. It's about the understanding. It's about, the truth. It's the most misunderstood plant on the face of the earth. I'm on Instagram at Branding Bud. You can email me directly at david@brandingbud.com or check out my website at brandingbud.com. Thank you, Curt.
And thank you to David Paleschuck this week, author of Branding Bud, a very exciting new book that helps companies market and brand in the newly legal cannabis markets. Thank you to Colleen Kibler in Maine, Wesley Donahoe in Colorado, Alana Armstrong in Toronto, David Rheins in sunny Seattle. We'll see you next week.
Have a bud and a smile.